look at some easy subnetting now. Subnetting, you'll find, is something that doesn't normally sink in straight away. It takes quite a lot of practice and reading, going over exercises, and should be some links on the page that this video is on for some subnetting tools just to create questions for you to go through. So it's definitely a skill, and like any skill, it does take a while to actually acquire. Alright, so just a note really about Subnet 0. Quite some time ago there was some debate. Well, the rule generally was you couldn't use the subnet that had a 0 on it. So for 192.168.1.0 with this mask here ending in 192, that generates 4 subnets. The rule was you couldn't use the 0 subnet, you could use the other subnets, and you couldn't use the last subnet. This was the broadcast subnet, they said. But for several years now you have been able to use it. So the rule is for all CISCO exams, certainly you can use all of the subnets. So don't get confused about which subnets you can and can't use. You can use them all now. So moving on, about CIDR, classless interdomain routing or routing. So this represents subnets as a slash value and then a number. And basically what the number is how many binary bits are being used for the subnet mask. So if it was 255.255.255, that's 3 lots of 8 binary bits. So 8, 16, 24, so /24 mask. If we're using 24 bits and then we've got another 6 bits from the last octet, then the 24 plus 6 is 30, so 30 binary bits. If it's a class B and we've stolen 1 bit, it's 16 plus 1, so 17 bits. So this makes representing our subnet masks a lot easier for diagrams. We can use it on routers as well, although we don't normally do it when we're typing it in. We normally type the mask out in full. But you need to know this sort of stuff for the exam and how we create these slash notations. So the subnetting secrets chart, this is this will be a lifesaver in the exam. We're going to cover this chart a few times over the various lectures. It's something I devised when I was writing my subnetting CCNA simplified book, actually, with the subnetting chapter for that. And what you do, you grab a pen and a piece of paper. You start off on the top right hand column, top right hand side. You write the number 1, and then you double it to 2. Then 4, 8, 16, 32, 64 and 128. So that's your top row, and basically you take the number 1 and double it until you get to the top value, 128, which is 8 binary bits. And then you take the first value, 128, and you add the next value to the right. So if you add 64 to 128, it gives you 192. If you add 32, it gives you 224. If you add 16, it gives you 240, and so on. If you add all these bits together, it basically gives you 255. So this is the first part of your subnetting secrets chart. This is actually the top part of the chart, as you'll see in a moment. Now we need a bottom part of the chart. The bottom part is for working out our network design requirements. And all we do is write the number 2, and then we add a -2. We add the -2 for our hosts part. We don't need to worry about -2 for the network parts. Take the number 2 and double it, and all you do is keep doubling the number. You can actually obviously double it to infinity, but for the purposes of our chart we can go to 512. If we need any to go further down, we just keep doubling, so we'd go to 1024 and so on. And this is the actual chart as we would write out for our exam. We'd write out the top row, which is our binary bits. Of our row to the left top is our subnet values. So any of these numbers here can be used for a subnet or in subnetting. And then bottom left we have our number 2, which we keep doubling. So the top part is for working out which subnet a host is in. Bottom part is how many subnets and how many hosts per subnet. And this is our design part of our exam. So we'll go through some examples here. Question is, which subnet is our host 192.168.1.100/26 in? The first step is always to turn that /26 into a subnet value. Now, a class C mask, because this is a class C number as we know, always has to be 255.255.255, and then we can steal some of the host bits. So to get from 24 to 26, we're obviously stealing 2 bits. So go along to our subnetting secrets chart, and all we do is tick, because we've stolen 2, we tick 2 parts along the top. This will tell us what increments our subnet is going up in, and we can see our subnets are going up in increments of 64. If we steal 2 bits along the top row, we tick down 2 bits along the left row, and this will tell us what our subnet value is. And in this instance, our subnet value, because we've ticked down 2, we can see it's 192. Tick across 2 and tick down 2. So next step, we're going up in increments of 64. I've written the host number on the top there. We know we're going up in increments of 64 because we ticked along the top till we got to 64. And remember, we're allowed to use the 0 subnet. Okay, we're always allowed to use the 0 because of the rule I explained at the start. So 0, then we add 64. Now technically we could stop here because the question is, which subnet is host 192.168.1.100 in? And the answer is obviously it's in the 64 subnet. We know that because the next subnet is 128. So pretty obvious that that's more than 100. We can see what our 3rd subnet is and our 4th subnet value if we need to work these out. Now if you want, you could actually work out all of the IP addresses within this subnet, 64 subnet. We don't need to because we've actually answered the question, but I'm just going to illustrate how you do it in case they ask a question like the host is 100, what's the broadcast address for that subnet? So our subnet value is 64. Our first host, we just add the number 1. To work out our last host, all we do is we'd add 64 to get to the next subnet, and we'd take 1 away, which will give us our broadcast number, 127, and we take 1 away from that, and that gives us our host number, 126. Okay, let's look at another example, and we're just following the same format. Every single question we follow the same format. It's got a /25 mask for our host 200.100.2.210. Turn that 25 into a subnet mask. Well, we've stolen 1 binary bit from 24 to get us to 25 binary bits for our mask. So all we do is tick 1 across on our subnet column. Because we've ticked across 1, we tick down 1, and that tells us that our subnet is going to be 128. 255.255.255.128. So we'll work out our subnet values. We're allowed to use the 0 and we're allowed to use the 128. So we've got 2 subnets, one ending in 0, one ending in 128. Our host is 210 on the 200.100.2 subnet. So obviously it's going to be in the 128 subnet. So that's basically the answer to our question. But just for completeness, I'm going to go through the hosts on this subnet. So it's our 128 subnet. If we wanted to work out our broadcast address, we just add 128 to that because that's our value, our increment. We take 1 away, which gives us our broadcast address. And if you want to work out your first host address, you just add the next number to the subnet number. All right, another short example. This time it's a Class B address. The rules are exactly the same. Our subnet is which subnet is 172.16.100.1 in. So actually our host number is 100.1, and we've got a /19 for our subnet. Now normally it's a /16. It's a 255.255 for Class B addresses. So we know we've stolen 3 bits to get from 16 to 19. Now this time we're actually looking at the 3rd octet. Remember, we're doing subnetting here, and we're subnetting on the 3rd octet because we've stolen 3 bits from the 3rd octet. So we tick 1, 2, 3. So we know our 3rd octet is going to be going up in increments of 32. And we tick down 3 to see what our subnet value is. So we know it's going to be 255.224.0. And again, we work out our subnet values. Actually, there's a lot of subnets, but I'm just going to go down as many as we need. And all we do is we start adding 32 to work out our subnet values. We're looking for host 100.1, and we can clearly see that it's going to be in the 96.0 subnet. The reason is the 128.0 is too high, the number's too high. If you wish, or if you're asked in the exam, you can work out the hosts. All you do is take your next subnet value, which is 172.16.128.0, and you roll back one to get your broadcast. You roll back another one to get your last available host, and you just add one to get your first host. So you add one to the 96.0. And we've got one more example. So I'm just going to scroll through here now so you can see rather than do a talk through. Feel free to pause the video as you go along so you can just do the working out yourself. The only point I wanted to make here is we work out our subnetting chart according to the last octet that we're doing our subnetting on. So bear in mind, although it's a class B address and you could get confused, we've stolen 8 bits from our third octet and we've stolen 5 bits from our last octet. So this column here needs to be looking at the last octet to do our ticking on. You can see we've got a whole bunch of available subnets here, far too many to count up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 172.16.100 subnet and we're going to start looking at the values at the end. You might want to use a subnetting calculator just to see how many values there are, because I think there's several hundred for this particular example. So it's just going to be too much to count up every single subnet. We need to dive straight into the relevant subnet that we're looking at. Okay, so an introduction to subnetting, lots more examples coming up and questions, and please use the subnetting question generator as well. The link should be on the bottom of the page, and come back to this lecture several times.